Hello, I'm Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress. Welcome to our ceremony for the 2020 Rebecca Johnson Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry. This prize carries a $10,000 award and recognizes a recent American Book of Poetry or the lifetime achievement of an American poet. This year, both honors are being awarded for the third time in the prize's history. This prize is particularly special to me. During the 1930s, Lyndon B. Johnson's sister, Rebecca, met O.P. Bobbitt when they worked in the cataloging department here at the Library of Congress. The two were poetry lovers in every sense. O.P. wooed Rebecca with poems typed on cards. His taste in poetry must have been pretty good because the two were soon married. And in memory of Rebecca, O.P. and his son Philip established this prize, which has been awarded at the Library of Congress since 1990. I'm grateful to Philip Bobbitt for his continuing support of this prize, and I'm pleased that he could join us today to tell us more about the prize's backstory.
Thank you, Dr. Hayden. This is the 30th year of the Rebecca Johnson Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry. It came about in this way. After my mother's death, I discovered in her writing desk a cache of old index cards with holes drilled through them, with scraps of poetry and lofty quotations. My father explained that these were exchanged as surreptitious notes under the eyes of a watchful supervisor at the Library of Congress, where my parents worked their way through college. These notes were really the origin of this prize. For 16 evenings, we have met at the library to honor my mother and the splendid winners, and I've spoken a bit about my family and the prize, which this year I must do remotely. When life returns to something like normal, I have no doubt that there will be two somewhere in the building exchanging notes, probably by email or Zoom, evading their supervisors, and I like to think that the prize honors them too.
Thank you. I'm now honored and thrilled to bestow the 2020 Rebecca Johnson Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry on two of our nation's finest poets. Terrence Hayes for the Best Book of Poetry in 2018-2019, and Natasha Trethewey for Lifetime Achievement. I'd like to thank the distinguished jurors who helped me reach my decision. Former Indiana Poet Laureate Adrian Matika, along with poet and former executive director of the Poetry Society of America, Elise Passion, selected by current Poet Laureate Joe Harjo, and scholar Betty Sue Flowers, selected by the Bobbitt family. I want to extend a special thanks to Betty Sue, who has generously served on every Bobbitt Prize jury since 2008. The Bobbitt jury declared that Terrence Hayes' American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin, published by Penguin Books in 2018, transforms the classic art and poetics in unexpected and timely ways that transform our understanding of both our history and ourselves. American Sonnets received the 2019 Hurston Wright Foundation Legacy Award for Poetry and was a finalist for numerous prizes. Terrence's other honors include a National Book Award, the Whiting Writers Award, an NAACP Image Award for Poetry, and a Pegasus Award for Poetry Criticism, as well as fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. Our second honoree for Lifetime Achievement is Natasha Trethewey. We know Natasha very well because she served as the U.S. Poet Laureate from 2012 until 2014. She is receiving the Bobbitt Lifetime Achievement Award for her extraordinary body of work, including 5 collections of poetry and 2 books of nonfiction. She served 2 terms as the 19th Poet Laureate of the United States, during which she launched her signature project, where poetry lives with the PBS NewsHour. Natasha's latest book is Memorial Drive, A Daughter's Memoir. The Bobbitt jury noted that Natasha's latest poetry collection, Monument, Poems New and Selected, reveals the arc of her poems as a poignant and compelling new narrative. This 2018 collection illuminates her far-reaching range while also serving as a testament to the integrity of her poetic vision. Congratulations to Terrence Hayes and Natasha Trethewey for your well-deserved honors. The conferring of the Bobbitt Prizes always includes a reading. Just because we're in a virtual world doesn't mean we will break with that tradition. Natasha, can we please hear some poems from throughout your career?
Over the course of my career thus far, I've been guided by my abiding obsessions, which arise from two existential wounds bound together by history and place. In his memorial to William Butler Yeats, W.H. Auden wrote, "Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry." Likewise, my native land, my South, my Mississippi, with its brutal history of racial violence and oppression, the ongoing manifestations of our nation's original sins of slavery and white supremacy, hurt me into poetry, inflicting my first wound. When I was born in Mississippi in 1966, on Confederate Memorial Day, exactly 100 years to the day that holiday glorifying the lost cause and white supremacy was first celebrated, my parents' interracial marriage was illegal there and as many as 20 states in the nation, rendering me illegitimate in the eyes of the law, persona non grata. My deeper wound came later, when I was 19. I'm going to read a few poems that trace the arc of my inextricably linked concerns, the bedrock of why I write. As Federico Garcia Lorca wrote, "The duende has to be roused from the furthest habitations of the blood, and in trying to heal the wound that never heals lies the strangeness." This is Miscegenation. In 1965, my parents broke two laws of Mississippi. They went to Ohio to marry, returned to Mississippi. They crossed the river into Cincinnati, a city whose name begins with a sound like sin, the sound of wrong, miss in Mississippi. A year later, they moved to Canada, followed a route the same as slaves, the train slicing the white glaze of winter, leaving Mississippi. Faulkner's Joe Christmas was born in winter, like Jesus, given his name for the day he was left at the orphanage, his race unknown in Mississippi. My father was reading War and Peace when he gave me my name. I was born near Easter, 1966, in Mississippi. When I turned 33, my father said, "It's your Jesus year. You're the same age he was when he died." It was spring, the hills green in Mississippi. I know more than Joe Christmas did. Natasha is a Russian name, though I'm not. It means Christmas child, even in Mississippi. I wrote my retrospective monument. Putting it together was a way for me to make sense of this arc of my career and the things that made me a writer. And so it begins with this poem. It's called Imperatives for Carrying On in the Aftermath. Do not hang your head or clench your fists when even your friend, after hearing the story, says, "My mother would never put up with that." Fight the urge to rattle off statistics that, more often, a woman who chooses to leave is then murdered. The 100th time your father says, "But she hated violence. Why would she marry a guy like that?" Don't waste your breath explaining again how abusers wait, are patient, that they don't beat you on the first date, sometimes not even the first few years of a marriage. Keep an impassive face whenever you hear "stand by your man," and let go your rage when you recall those words were advice given your mother. Try to forget the first trial before she was dead, when the charge was only attempted murder. Don't belabor the thinking or the sentence that allowed her ex husband's release a year later, or the juror who said, "It's a domestic issue. They should work it out themselves." Just breathe when, after you read your poems about grief, a woman asks, "Do you think your mother was weak for men?" Learn to ignore subtext. Imagine a thought cloud above your head, dark and heavy, with the words you cannot say. Let silence rain down. Remember, you were told by your famous professor that you should write about something else, unburden yourself of the death of your mother, and just pour your heart out in the poems. Ask yourself what's in your heart, that reliquary blood locket and seed bed, and contend with what it means. The folk saying you learned from a Korean poet in Seoul, that one does not bury the mother's body in the ground, but in the chest, or, like you carry her corpse on your back. This next poem is a poem that I dedicated to my father. I had to have a very difficult conversation with my father um, in a very public way, in the only language that he would listen to, and that is the language of poetry. Enlightenment. In the portrait of Jefferson that hangs at Monticello, he is rendered two-toned, his forehead white with illumination, a lit bulb, the rest of his face in shadow, darkened as if the artist meant to contrast his bright knowledge, its dark subtext. By 1805, when Jefferson sat for the portrait, he was already linked to an affair with his slave. Against a backdrop blue and ethereal, a wash of paint that seems to hold him in relief, Jefferson gazes out across the centuries, his lips fixed as if he's just uttered some final word. The first time I saw the painting, I listened as my father explained the contradictions, how Jefferson hated slavery, though out of necessity, my father said, had to own slaves. That his moral philosophy meant he could not have fathered those children, would have been impossible, my father said. For years, we debated the distance between word and deed. I'd follow my father from book to book, gathering citations, listen as he named, like a field guide to Virginia, each flower and tree and bird, as if to prove a man's pursuit of knowledge is greater than his shortcomings, the limits of his vision. I did not know then the subtext of our story, that my father could imagine Jefferson's words made flesh in my flesh, the improvement of the blacks in body and mind in the first instance of their mixture with the whites, or that my father could believe he'd made me better. When I think of this now, I see how the past holds us captive, its beautiful ruin etched on the mind's eye, my young father a rough outline of the old man he's become, needing to show me the better measure of his heart, an equation writ large at Monticello. That was years ago. Now we take in how much has changed. Talk of Sally Hemings, someone asking, how white was she? Parsing the fractions as if to name what made her worthy of Jefferson's attentions, a near-white quadroon mistress, not a plain black slave. Imagine stepping back into the past, our guide tells us then, and I can't resist whispering to my father, this is where we split up. I'll head around to the back. When he laughs, I know he's grateful I've made a joke of it. This history that links us, white father, black daughter, even as it renders us other to each other. And this last poem is the last in my retrospective, in which I try to say it plainly. It's after a painting, Miguel Cabrera's portrait of Saint Gertrude from 1763. Articulation. In the legend, Saint Gertrude is called to write after seeing in a vision the Sacred Heart of Christ. Cabrera paints her among the instruments of her faith, quill, inkwell, and open book, rings on her fingers like Christ's many wounds, the heart emblazoned on her chest, the holy infant nestled there as if sunk deep in a wound. Against the dark backdrop, her face is a wafer of light. How not to see in the saint's image my mother's last portrait, the dark backdrop, her dress black as a habit, the bright edge of her afro ringing her face with light. And how not to recall her many wounds, ring finger shattered, her ex-husband's bullet finding her temple, lodging where her last thought lodged. 3 weeks gone, my mother came to me in a dream, her body whole again, but for one perfect wound, the singular articulation of all of them, a whole center of her forehead, the size of a wafer, light pouring from it. How then could I not answer her life with mine? She who saved me with hers. And how could I not, bathed in the light of her wound, find my calling there? Thanks.
I really almost just want to talk about Natasha. It's such a great honor to be here with her. She started reading and I was like, okay, what am I going to read? And then that voice, it just always lures you back into its power. So I could just listen to you all day, Natasha. So let me talk about this book. I want to say, first of all, I mostly am just trying to write to get the day down. So I'm not always happy to write about the distractions that keep me from just, listening to the world. So about 4 years ago, in November, the election certainly was a volume that hit me, that made me start writing these poems that have been honored here. And so I'm going to read some of them. This first poem that I'm going to read you, which is on the back of the book, is the poem I wrote right around this time. I think I had written a few. I literally started the day after the election was called. But at some point, I began asking myself, what is it that I'm doing? And so I have a series of poems over this 2-year period where I'm just kind of defining why I'm doing this. So this is the one that I put on the back of the book to kind of signal its role. It's really trying to define an American sonnet. American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. I lock you in an American sonnet that is part prison, part panic closet, a little room in a house set aflame. I lock you in a form that is part music box, part meat grinder to separate the song of the bird from the bone. I lock your persona in a dream inducing sleeper hold while your better selves watch from the bleachers. I make you both Jim and Crow here. As the Crow, you undergo a beautiful catharsis trapped one night in the shadows of the gym. As the Jim, the feel of crow shit dropping to your floors is not unlike the stars falling from the pep rally posters on your walls. I make you a box of darkness with a bird in its heart. Voltas of acoustics, instinct, and metaphor. It is not enough to love you. It is not enough to want you destroyed. So all of the poems are really trying to get at that kind of ambiguity that I think many of us maybe feel all the time in the country. Certainly recently, whatever your recent is, if that's 4 years, 2 years, 1 year, 2020, that question of should it be destroyed, should it be rebuilt, the ambiguity that comes from a place which you feel like you have some deep relationship to, and also are just deeply confused by a lot of the time. So the poem that I put in the front of the book that opens the book, also called American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin, and also going at that ambiguity of the love gesture in a sonnet towards someone who seems to be trying to wipe you out. And again, you can hear maybe the ambiguity in this one, but this too is also trying to define what is it I'm trying to do in this period of these poems being written. American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. The Black poet would love to say his century began with Hughes or, God forbid, Wheatley, but actually it began with all the poetry weirdos and warriors, poetry whiners and winos falling from ship bows and sunset bridges and windows. In a second, I'll tell you how little writing rescues. My hunch is that Sylvia Plath was not especially fun company. A drama queen, thin-skinned and skittery, she thought her poems were ordinary. What do you call a visionary who does not recognize her vision? Orpheus was alone when he invented writing. His manic chatter, his manic drawing became a kind of writing when he sent his beloved a sketch of an eye with an X struck through it. He meant, I am blind without you. She thought he meant, I never want to see you again. It is possible he meant that too. So in this context, maybe you hear, again, this question of sort of reading between the lines, trying to view things from different angles, and even sort of going against certain kinds of expectations in the poems. So this too is another of those attempts in me trying to define what it is. I think I'm just going to jump around a little bit and end up with another one of those sorts of poems. Maybe I'll read you like 3 more here. Here's one. Actually, this is another one of them too. I guess I can read you that one. Actually, you know what? Let me read you this one. American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. Maxine Waters, being of fire, being of sword, shaped like a silver tongue, cauldron, siren, black as tarnation, black as the consciousness of a black president's wife, black as his black tie tuxedo beside his black wife in room after room of whiteness. My grandmother's name had water in it too, Watermaker. I have wept listening to Aretha Franklin sing Precious Lord. I have placed my thumb on the tongue of a Black woman with an unbreakable voice. I love your mouth. Floodgate, storm door. You are black as the gap in Baldwin's teeth. You are black as a Baldwin speech. I love how your blackness leaves them in the dark. I love how even your soundbite leaves a mark. You know, some days I was just trying to write, you know, towards heroes, and saying sometimes too, like a kind of courage will kill me, a kind of beauty can kill me. So when I think about the kind of sprawl of the book, that just allows me to not always be struggling with kind of like trying to see the positive side, but like just fully embracing it and then turning that thing around. So one of those things would be just, you know, the face of James Baldwin. So I think one day I just woke up and I just thought about that face all day. American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. 7 of the 10 things I love in the face of James Baldwin concern the spiritual elasticity of his expression. The sachet between left and right eyebrow, for example. The crease between his eyes, like a tuning fork or furrow, like a riverbed branching into tributaries, like lines of rapturous sentences searching for a period. The dimple in his chin narrows and expands like a pupil. Most of all, I love all of his eyes. And those wrinkles, the feel and color of wet driftwood in the mud around those eyes. Mud is made of simple rain and earth, the same baptismal hills and spills of dirt James Baldwin is made of. I thought I had these things marked better. American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. It was discovered the best way to combat sadness was to make your sadness a door, or make it an envelope of wireless chatter, or wires pulled from the radio tape recorder your mother bought you for Christmas in 1984. If you think a hammer is the only way to hammer a nail, you ain't thought of the nail correctly. My problem was I decided to make myself a poem. It made me sweat in private selfishly. It made me bleed, bleep, and weep for health. As a poem, I could show my children the man I dreamed I was. My mother and fathers, my half brothers, the lovers I lost. Just mourning as a poem, I asked myself if I was going to weep today. And also, again, trying to say why I think that poems are the place for working these questions out or wrestling with the questions, even when they don't show up as answers. And so the ambiguity becomes just a little bit less ambiguous when you have it in front of you, written out, revised, re-seen, turned around. I think that's, kind of in these two. All right. American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. Our sermon today concerns the dialectic blessings in transgression and transcendence. We're on the middle floor where the darkness we bury is equal to the lightness we intend. We stand in the valley and go down on our knees on the mountain. One rope pulls a body down and into earth, the other pulls up and after stars. To be divided is to be multiplied. Let us ponder how it is that you and I have remained alive. Mississippi and all the seas bound to sky by rain, the root and reach of all the trees. When the wound is deep, the healing is heroic. Suffering and ascendance require the same work. Our sermon today sets the beauty of sin against the purity of dirt. And this is the last one. American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. The song must be cultural, confessional, clear, but not obvious. It must be full of compassion and crows bowing in a vulture's shadow. The song must have 6 sides to it and a clamor of vultus. The song must turn on the compass of language like a tangle of wire endowed with feeling. The notes must tear and tear. There must be a love for the minute and minute. There must be a record of witness and daydream. Where the heart is torn or feathered and tarred, where death is undone, time diminished, the song must hold its own storm and drum and shed a noise so lovely it is sung at sunset weddings, baptisms, and beheadings henceforth.
I'd just like to engage both of you about the possibility that poetry can help us better understand the present. And Terrence, why don't you start?
Well, I was just talking to a group of poets this morning, and I said to them, I think poetry is just sort of helps you develop a kind of emotional intelligence. So it's a place to work out those confusions. And it's not a place to solve them so much as like a place to record them, you know? And it just gives you a shape to deal with things that seem very chaotic. So that's language, but it's also feelings. Yeah, that's so it was just a thing I talked to him about. I think certainly that's what you're exercising. Like, what is the muscle? What is the thing being developed by thinking very intimately about language and its power? It's a kind of emotional intelligence.
Natasha, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it also offers us the opportunity for an intense and close observation. I think we have to slow down, not only to pay attention to the language in a poem, but it also asks us to slow down and look at the world. And that's one of the ways that we make sense of the world that we're in and make sense of the present, because we're taking time to really observe it and to think about it deeply. And also just the ability to hear in the intimacy of a poem another voice, which allows us to see a world that may not be exactly as we see it, but we learn something through empathy about how someone else does.
And what about the historical tie-ins and being able to use the power of words to get people to reflect and even bring in the past too? They're thinking about the present.
Well, you know, I write a lot about the past, but whenever I'm writing about the past, I'm always also writing about the present. You know, for example, monuments. Monuments tell us as much about the present moment, how we're responding to them, as we've seen recently with issues arising around the Confederate monuments across the South, but also tells us about the moment in which they were erected. So, you know, poems exist in that way too, to tell us both about this moment and moments moving forward and backward.
And Terrence, you mentioned you were talking to a group from the UK. So it sounds like poetry is almost a universal language, even though the languages might be different, but it's a way of connecting.
Yeah, and there's something that happens in that intimacy, whatever happens when people get together and just start talking about language, really. Because my answer is like, you know, it's different if I'm a teacher or if I'm a poet. Because if I'm a teacher, I'm saying, let's look at the work, let's look at the poetry that's in the world. Can I help us through these moments, consume that power, and you know, bring that wisdom back out? But if I'm a poet, I'm saying to people, I think you want to be trying to write it. I think you want to be trying to make this poem. You know, you're bringing the sort of inside out versus the outside in. And so part of what we're trying to do is to make people who aren't poets understand that this is a power that everybody can access mostly. But for me, so much of it is about, you know, you got to do it to understand it if you really want to know what these poems are going to do for you, whatever they are and whatever the subject is. The act of writing is really where the real power happens, I think. As a poet.
And Natasha, and the poets, and both of you are able to bring that inside out, you said, and the outside in, and get people to reflect. Do you, and both of you do so many wonderful readings with live audiences and connecting with people. Do you ever have people come up to you afterwards and ask you how they could start to write poetry or start to express themselves?
Yeah. You know, usually I think when people come up to me to say something like that, they're already trying to write poems, or they're already secretly writing poems. I mean, this is one of the things that I learned very powerfully when I was at the Library of Congress as the poet laureate. And I think every other laureate has learned this same lesson, that more people are writing poetry than we know about, and they're often doing it in secret. And I found that people wanted to be able to reveal that, and that if they found audiences, groups of people, communities where they could share their own work, then it wasn't something that they had to hide as they were from their family members or their coworkers or something like that. And so I think often people are just looking for not just to start writing poems, but to enter a community in which they can share poems with each other, reading and writing.
Absolutely agree. I also tell people when they come up and say that, I say no adjectives. So you want to write a poem, bad poem, experimental poem, spoken word poem. And so, there is such a thing as poems. I mean, there are things that you want to be thinking about to do it, but essentially no adjectives, because the bad poems can be revised, so even failure in this kind of activity is a good thing. So that means anybody could come to you. My mom could say, I think I want to try to write a poem tomorrow. I'd be like, go right ahead. Don't put no adjectives in front of it. Just say you wrote a poem. And that's enough. It's enough.
You wrote it, and you don't have to hide it. And the fact that both of you are not hiding and that you could be celebrated, and the Bobbitt Prizes really exemplify that, because we want to keep highlighting your work and what you do that helps other people understand the power of words. So congratulations again, and I want to encourage everyone to read and be inspired by your work.
Thank you, Dr. Hayden.
Thank you. It's a great honor. You're doing such important work. You've been doing it for so long. So any acknowledgement from what you represent is always a good day, a good moment.
Well,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Once again, congratulations on your Bobbitt Prizes, and I encourage all of you to explore their work.